Okay, welcome to Talkback. I'm Sheila, and today I have the great pleasure to interview Steven Goldstein, a civil rights activist, a lawyer, a journalist, studying to be a rabbi, a TV producer. Is there anything you haven't done, Steven?
I feel like Zelig in a Woody Allen
Okay.
movie.
I mean, it's just amazing. And you've written a book called The Turn On, which we're going to talk about later, but we need to work our way toward it because we got to figure out what your life is all about first and how you came to write that book. So that's going to be our first section, okay?
Yep.
And this is being live streamed on Facebook for Norwich Comcast, so any of your friends out there will be able to access it and listen to
So
you.
my warm regards to my friends and family in Connecticut.
Okay, great. And we welcome you to Eastern Connecticut, and we know you'll be talking to Connecticut College and talking
Yes.
about your book.
Yep.
So let's start about your life. I read so much about you. I've been immersed in Steven Goldstein the last few days.
I'm so
It's
sorry.
okay.
Are you okay?
It was interesting.
Okay.
It was very interesting, and I love meeting you. And I said, what is the defining sentence about you? And I kind of figured it out, and you tell me if it's okay. Finding the right story to tell that's captivating, that leads not just to entertainment, but leads to a goal of doing justice, changing laws, and now you're going to be a rabbi, tikkun olam, repairing the world. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, how did you get started doing that?
Well, so as you told your distinguished audience, I've done many things in my life. I have been a lawyer, a civil rights leader, a television news producer. I once worked for Oprah, a political campaign manager. I wrote this book, and now I'm studying to be a rabbi. And the common thread through all that was, I think I came out of my mother's womb wanting to change the world.
Okay.
But it was more than that. I mean, yes, that was a natural predilection. But I want to tell you about something that's not in my book. So the most enduring great love of my life is my brother, who has autism, profound autism. His name is Richie. And I don't write about this in the book. I did in a first draft, and it was actually very hard for me because it was so emotional. And when I grew up in the 1960s, doctors were still telling parents and families to institutionalize kids and don't even visit. It was a great shame. And
Was your brother institutionalized?
No, he was not.
Okay.
My parents, my brother was not institutionalized. My parents were ahead of their time. And my brother has been in the most progressive education settings. And he's 2 years younger than me, and he's a miracle. And so I saw my parents fight for his right to an education. I actually saw them sue New York State not to mainstream him, because the trend was mainstream, but if you're profoundly differently abled, mainstreaming into a regular public school is ridiculous. And so they sued for New York State to fund where he was, which was a great private village, and my parents won. So I hung around courtrooms when I was a little kid. Now, I always had an interest in social change, and I was 6 years old and played hooky from school at age 6 to volunteer for Hubert Humphrey in the 1968 election. So I was born with it. My parents were not political at all. But they were activists for my brother. And I saw what they achieved for him. And so I hung around courtrooms. And that inculcated something in me that lasted for my life, that I would fight for underprivileged people and people with disabilities or who are disadvantaged or who face discrimination of any kind. And so it was really drummed into me.
Okay. So by example, your parents by example.
Yeah, and
Anyway.
I will say this. So whenever I see somebody who's oppressed, there is like a Pavlovian response in me where I instantly remember my childhood. When I was 8, 10, 12, of hanging around courtrooms fighting for my brother, seeing my parents do it. And that's where my head goes. And it does produce a ferocity in fighting for people that I don't take no for an answer. It wins one a lot of friends, And some people don't necessarily like that style either, and that's okay. That's okay. You can't make an omelet unless you crack some eggs.
Right. So you grew up in New York. I know we talked earlier. You grew up in Deepdale.
I did.
In
So
Little Neck.
I grew up, and you know this, Sheila. So I grew up in New York City, but as far out from.
It was a swampland when
Yes.
they built the Deepdale
Right.
originally.
And it was as far out from Manhattan as you can get in New York City.
And Long Island
Right.
Expressway wasn't even built yet.
Exactly. So
completely. Yeah.
I was about 4 or 5 blocks from the Nassau County border.
Right.
And it felt much more like Long
More
Island.
suburban, right.
More suburban. You wouldn't know you were in New York City.
Right.
And it was a wonderful place to grow up. The school system was terrific. And I carry Queens with me in my heart all the time.
Okay. So you went to the schools in Queens.
I went to
right?
school, public
Okay.
schools.
And when
then-
you were a little kid and you were watching your parents and their struggles with your brother, did you decide then that you wanted to be an attorney?
Well, actually, I was age 7, sitting in a car, and my parents said, "So what do you want to be when you grow up?" As if I'm supposed to know at age 7. But I had an answer. I said, "I want to be a rabbi."
Oh, okay.
And my parents basically gave the answer, "What kind of job is that for a Jewish person?"
Really?
like rabbis make no money. Okay?
You got to be a doctor or a lawyer?
Yeah, doctor or a lawyer, right? So I went through every kind of other school imaginable. I went to graduate school in government at Harvard. I went to law school at Columbia. I went to journalism school at Columbia, got my degrees all there. And in midlife, I decided I'm going to follow my childhood dream. And it's been the most gratifying experience of my life.
You're in rabbinical school right now.
I am in rabbinical
And
school
when
right now, as I wrote this book.
When will you be done?
About Moses' age,
Okay.
120.
Really? You're doing it part-time?
Yes. So I'm in a school that does allow for that part-time. You know,
Okay.
it's hard to go back to school when you're 57 because you sort of have to say goodbye to the world. And that's hard. I mean, I'm an activist. I like to be involved. And so I'm going
Yeah, it's
part-time.
a different kind of thing. You get
Yeah.
more reflection. I mean, there are rabbis that do social activism.
Right.
I saw our rabbi in West Roxbury when my family goes in Massachusetts. She was arrested in D.C. protesting the immigration policies.
Fabulous.
So that's the kind of rabbi you probably will turn out to be.
Sure, but, you know, I'll be a congregational rabbi. And
Right.
what appeals to me in wanting to be a rabbi is, well, first, to help people on an individual basis. You know, I don't have to be a rabbi to be a social activist. I've done that my whole life. But 2, I've always been intensely Jewish. I didn't grow up in a religious household whatsoever.
Well, you were conservative.
I was conservative, but my parents went to shul, synagogue, once a year. And I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, but my mother would serve food at about 2 o'clock on Yom Kippur, like have friends over. And
Uh-oh, really?
Oh, no, challah on the table for Passover. So, and I was the
It's
one.
like Chinese food in the kosher house.
It's like
Same-
Chinese food
same-
in the kosher house,
yeah.
right. You're safe trade.
Right.
And I was always aware that was not okay with me. And so instead of being a kid from a religious home who rebelled, I wouldn't call it a rebellion.
You were just the opposite.
But I was sort of the opposite. I came from a very proudly Jewish household, but it was not religious at all. It was very proud. We were aware of who we were. We loved being who we were. We were not assimilated. But I saw more.
Right. But you're not finished with your social activism because there's a lot more to do.
There's a lot more to do, and I certainly have opinions about the current president.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We'll get to that because
Yeah.
I know everybody has an opinion on that. So yeah, I think it's so interesting, the trajectory of your life. You know, some people say that life is like on a stage, and as you get older and you approach the end, the curtain starts to close. But I don't look at it that way, and I don't think you do. As you get older, the curtain opens more and more and more. Is that right?
Yes, and you know, it's interesting. So you learn lessons by the time you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s that you didn't know when you were younger. And I think you get better, and the excesses of one's personality that perhaps you should have shunted, you do, and you're your best self. So I know things about myself and about social change and about the world that I couldn't possibly have known when I was
that
younger.
you've discovered over the trajectory of all the
Right,
things that
exactly.
you've done. So let's talk about you've been involved in the same-sex fight.
Right, I'm a
obviously,
proud leader in the
and you're gay.
LGBT community.
And how about your trajectory as a gay man? You grew up in the 60s, 70s.
Right.
That was the age of AIDS.
So
we had very dear friends.
I just want to tell your audience we're making history here because I am the gayest person who's ever been in the studio or will be.
Okay.
So I'm really honored.
I'll have to check
Probably
out.
the most Jewish too.
Most Jewish.
So my nickname on Facebook is Loud Gay Jew. That's okay. I take it well.
Is that true?
Yeah, but I wear it as a badge of pride.
But you know,
Yeah.
we're joking, but it was also the age of AIDS, and our dear friends in our condo
Yeah.
downstairs in Little Neck, 3 sons, the middle one was gay. He died of AIDS in his mother's arms. So tell me what it was
So,
like growing up
let me say this.
in those years.
I was old enough to already know
So you
about
you escaped that
AIDS.
era.
AIDS, and bluntly, I already knew about safe sex by the time I was an adult because the AIDS crisis had already begun.
Okay.
And I will say that the discrimination that people with HIV and AIDS faced remains some of the most horrible discrimination imaginable. And our government is still not appropriating enough money.
Well, the Supreme Court is
cure.
poised to do away with gay marriage, aren't they? Almost, maybe.
Yeah, so it's a tough time for LGBT rights. And I will say this, so I've been a staffer on Capitol Hill, and I worked on issues such as a women's right to choose, gun control, and LGBT rights. And a lot of what I had achieved as a congressional staff member in the 1990s has been rolled back, and you don't really expect that. The arc of justice is long, but it usually
Bends toward justice.
Yes. Well, I'm waiting for the long view for it to bend again. But right now, the bend is against justice. And I believe that those of us who are progressive can get complacent. Let's look at the issue of choice. Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973. From that moment on, the far right wing who oppose a woman's right to choose kept planning for decades to remake the judiciary.
And they did a very good job.
And they did.
And we did a terrible job.
Our side was complacent.
And when you told people, you've got to vote for Hillary or you've got to vote for Kerry because of the Supreme Court, they didn't listen to you.
They didn't listen. And you know,
There you go.
if you look at social justice, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. That's great. I love Dr. Martin Luther King. That's his quote.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than that. The moral arc of social justice has periodic backlashes. And it's always been, on social justice issues, 3 steps forward, 1 or 2 back.
Right.
3 steps forward, 1 or 2 back. And I think we progressives forget that it's 1 or 2 back, that the fight continues after a victory and it gets more intense to protect what you've won. And I don't think we progressives are very good at protecting what we've won.
But in the social environment, walking the carriages on the street and you're seeing same-sex couples, there's an acceptance out there that, of course, we have won, and you don't see the kind of animosity in the general social atmosphere. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, it's changed. So I founded and ran New Jersey's LGBTQ civil rights organization from 2004 through 2013. And in 2004, in New Jersey, a very progressive state like Connecticut is today, I was spit at, kicked at.
Wow.
I think the lowest point in my life was in those early years. A group of Hasidim would follow me who opposed LGBT rights. And at one rally, they started yelling at me, Hitler, Hitler, that I'm the new Hitler, that because I was for marriage equality, I was responsible for the end of the Jewish people. Putting logic aside, my Judaism is so central to me. I never had an experience where I broke down in tears, like wept in public.
Wow.
And the second they said it, and I couldn't hold it together, and somebody else had to speak instead of me. But those years, it was common, as far back as 2004. Today, it's chic to be gay. It's the greatest thing in the whole world. For all of you who are not gay, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You don't know how fabulous it is. It's awesome.
Yeah.
The world loves it.
But we have to talk about
Yeah.
your when you were
Loves it.
Garden State Equality.
Okay.
At the same time that you were in Garden State Equality, in Connecticut here, we were fighting for same-sex marriage rights. And
It's true, and you had a wonderful leader. Her name was Ann Stanback.
right.
And she was head of the LGBT movement here
Right.
in Connecticut.
And
she
in
was fabulous.
2008,
Right.
we had a case in the Supreme Court in
Yep.
Connecticut. Some states get the same-sex marriage through legislation, others get it through the court system. And I was very proud and privileged. I was a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, and I had the great honor, I wanted to tell you about that, of signing the amicus brief on that case.
Thank you.
But it was a big struggle
Thank you.
to get a lot of these high ego, high-powered male chauvinist, big fat lawyers in Connecticut to sign on to that. We had a one-year fight to get people to come along, and I was very proud to sign that brief, went to the Supreme Court, and two of the
Thank you.
plaintiffs, and we talk about that, you say when you're doing a case, it's very important to get the right plaintiffs.
Very important.
And two of the plaintiffs are from my hometown, Colchester, and two women. One was a marriage therapist who would say, I'm a marriage therapist and I can't get married. And her partner of 40 years, who was our electrician in our home. And after we won the case by one vote in the Supreme Court, my husband and I were honored to be invited to the first gay wedding in Connecticut.
How was the wedding?
It was the best wedding I ever went to.
Right.
As
Right.
soon as they were pronounced spouse and spouse, the entire congregation stood and applauded for about 15 minutes and cried.
Amazing.
It was fantastic. So tell me, in New Jersey, tell us what you did with your freeheld case.
Oh, well, first of all, so
and
how we
tell
won
about
how we
that.
won marriage in New Jersey was a few years before nationally. So we passed marriage for same-sex couples in both houses of the state
the
legislature.
governor, your
we
Christie.
had Chris Christie as governor, who vetoed it. Now, frankly, so I knew Chris Christie. I know him still. He is a different person in private. So when I ran New Jersey's gay rights organization and he was governor, we spoke. He couldn't give a damn about marriage equality. But he made clear he was running for president, and you could not, in the Republican Party, possibly be for equality.
So he had to veto
even now.
it.
Oh, he made it perfectly clear. Perfectly clear. And he said, do you think I care if you get married? He said, do you think that if gay people get married, I really believe that it's going to hurt the institution of marriage? He said, that's bull S. And, but I'm sorry, I'm vetoing him. So we sued him, and it was actually the second legal case, so I'm truncating the story. We sued him, and we won unanimously in the New Jersey Supreme Court, and it was Governor Christie's first major, huge loss of his career. He had lost a local freeholder race earlier, but we beat Chris Christie, so hopefully that'll go on my epitaph someday.
Okay, but you're also a TV star. You also produced shows, and you worked on the Oprah Show, which is
did.
so fascinating because you followed the same idea. Find a person, a story that captivates the audience.
It's true.
And you'll get your message across, and you'll get something changed.
So here's how that happened, how I wound up working in TV and in government. And I know we'll talk about the book in the next segment, but I'll refer to it a little here. I went to law and journalism school at Columbia University. I didn't really want to be a lawyer, but my parents said, you will be a lawyer. And I guess, like every obedient Jewish son, I said, okay, It's preposterous.
But didn't you
I
go
said,
to
okay.
journalism school before
So I
law school?
I went to Brandeis, then I got my master in public policy
Right.
from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and I went to journalism school and law school at the same time. And so I got my master's along the way in journalism in 1988 and my law degree from Columbia in 1990. And so I went right into TV. That's really what I wanted to do. I never wanted to be a lawyer. Hence, I wound up becoming a law professor someday. I mean, I've taught law, and I always begin my law school courses with, I have no idea why I'm here. The last thing I ever wanted to be was a lawyer. And it gets laughs, but I became a lawyer.
So you use it as a platform for your social justice
right,
stuff,
so they all had
Right.
they all had the same goal. And I would say it was populism, not biased. I wanted to stand up for the little person. And so when I would produce TV stories, that was the goal. When I produced shows at Oprah, that was the goal. When I was a lawyer in Congress, that was a goal.
And when you were a staff on the committees in Congress, you
Yeah.
worked for Schumer's judiciary.
I did, so I worked for Chuck Schumer when he was a House member.
And then in the Senate, you worked with Lautenberg.
So I worked for of blessed memory now, Senator Frank Lautenberg, who was
Right.
like a father figure to me.
Right.
Most wonderful man I ever
But the
met.
same thing there. And we can talk about the hearings now on impeachment. I'm sure you have a lot interesting to say about that. But your goal was to get somebody in front of the committee who could really highlight and explain an issue in the most captivating, interesting way.
Absolutely.
So you could get a good legislation passed.
So here's what happened. Here's how I wound up being a lawyer for the U.S. House Judiciary Committee when I had vowed that I never was going to be a lawyer. I was just going to be a journalist. I went to Columbia Law to make my parents happy. And I was a television producer in Washington producing investigative pieces, very hard-hitting investigative pieces. And one day, after about a year and a half of those pieces, Congress called and said, would you work for us as a lawyer, investigator, and on the U.S. House Judiciary Committee, help write legislation? And I said, okay, my career is about to take a different turn now, and I did. And so coming with a TV background meant that I had some training already in telling stories and making them palpable. And so when I would organize hearings for Chuck, they were like television shows. They were very captivating. In one hearing, I actually got House members to agree temporarily to give up their seats. It was a hearing on gun control, and to have a child from each of their districts sit in their seats. A child speaking about gun control, many of them giving first-hand stories of either somebody they lost or, and I know we're not all that far from Newtown, Connecticut, so this is an issue of great concern here. And so it was quite compelling. Years later, when I would help the New Jersey legislature organize hearings on marriage equality, in one hearing we got the parents of same-sex couples pleading. And so I produced hearings with a flair, and I began to take notes on what made a good committee witness and what made them likable. And that's how my book developed, and we can talk about the next segment.
We're going to talk about it, but do you have any comment? We just started the hearings on the impeachment, and I'm thought of you after reading all your book and your information. Are the Democrats doing a good job presenting the most captivating witnesses? They don't have the first hand. The other people have, Trump has ordered none of the people who have first-hand knowledge to actually testify, right? They won't honor subpoenas. So they're doing this with career people who are very impressive people, but is this going to make an impact? Are these hearings going to do what you think they should do to move the issue forward and to get Trump impeached?
So as of right now, we're doing this live, but for those who watch this on tape, we've had only one day of impeachment hearings where Ambassador Bill Taylor testified, and George Kent of the State Department. And here was the challenge for Democrats at the hearings yesterday. They were boring. I'm being very blunt.
That's what I.
They're boring.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't think that Ambassador Taylor was boring. I thought he was actually riveting, and he has certainly developed into a meme on social media. People are riveted about him. But I have to wonder whether the average non-engaged American is going to sit through hours and hours of impeachment hearings. There's a word in Yiddish called spilkes, which basically
no, sitzfleisch too.
Yeah, right.
Can't
It basically
sit
means
still.
you can't sit
Yeah.
still, you have ants in your pants, whatever the expression is. The average American is not going to sit hours. So I am so not a Republican. I am so progressive. But here's one thing the Republicans did do. While we people who are educated progressive activists make fun of the Republican theatrics, it held the attention. It was captivating enough for your typical American. And we were our side, and Adam Schiff did a fine job from a legal and investigative standpoint. And the questioner for us was terrific. But we were very, very sober and straightforward and modulated. And you had these Republican theatrics.
Yeah,
and all of us in our educated progressive bubble say, "Oh, America's not going to buy that." No, America bought Donald Trump, and
You're right.
America likes
That's right, yeah.
theatrics. And so the outcome is going to be this. I don't know. This is politics. So I don't think the hearings will move many Americans.
We need something more dramatic. Some bigger shoe has to drop somewhere, right?
Yes.
That's what we need.
Donald Trump has half joked that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would like it. It's almost getting to that point where he's going to have to do something like that for people to clearly take a side against him.
Right. Okay. So that's a depressing note.
Yep.
But we're going to continue discussions about your book.
Okay.
And about the ideas in that. It was so fascinating. It's really interesting. And we're going to talk more about what you did in New Jersey and the fact that you're not a movie star, but you're portrayed in the movies, right? For your work.
Wow. So this is fascinating. So
We
when
only
I
got
was
2 minutes. We got to wrap up.
I was head of Garden State Equality. A documentary camera followed me around. They made a documentary. I was in it in 2007. It won the Oscar for Best Documentary. It was good. In 2015, Hollywood made a movie based on the documentary, and
like
Steve
it.
Carell played me. It was terrible. He
stereotyped you?
Yeah, but you know what was shocking? I actually said to him, "Steve, have you ever met a Jewish person before?" Because when they pre-interviewed me, I said, what you have to understand about me is my central identity is as a Jewish person.
How can you ask that of a Hollywood actor? They all, I mean...
Yeah, but let me give you an example. If a line in the movie said something like "oi," he would go "oi,"
Oi.
and I would say, "Steve, it's not oi, it's oi. You're killing me. What are you doing to me?"
You didn't get the oi right.
But I'm saying that
You
as
blew the oi, that's it.
movie oi. But it was quite. At least I wasn't the 40-year-old virgin.
Okay. All right. On that note, we're going to end this half hour, and then stay tuned because we're going to talk to Steven about his book, The Turn On, in our next show. See you next time on Talk Back. Good night.
Right.